Hello again, friends. Today, I am really excited to be talking to David Allison, who's the founder of ValueGraphics. And David, it's lovely to see you. And the first thing I want to ask you is, everybody understands what demographics are. Obviously, ValueGraphics is a play on that. What's the difference?
Well, there's one more we have to put in there as well, which is psychographics. And we talk about them like a three-legged stool of how you need to understand the people that you want to communicate with. So demographics are a description. We all know this is like age, gender, income, marital status, all that kind of stuff. It tells you what people are, but it doesn't tell you who people are. And that's kind of the problem. We've been using this as a really crazy way to think that just because you're a boomer, you're going to be like this, or just because you're a millennial, you're going to like avocado toast. So we know all that kind of crazy stuff and the stereotypes that come along with demographic profiling, but it's still useful to know the demographics of a group of people that you want to communicate to. And I'll get into that more if you want to ask some more questions about that. Psychographics are all those other things that we'd like to collect data about. Have you walked past my store? How many times have you bought this thing? How do you feel about this brand versus that brand? All that stuff that's not demographics, we pile up and we call that psychographics. And so that's interesting because it establishes some kind of a history. And in that history, you can see a pattern, perhaps, that people have behaved a certain way or felt a certain way. Both of those things are super useful. The problem is what we're usually trying to do is to change people's minds, change people's behaviors, get them to do something different than they've done before. And in order to do that, you need to know what they value, because humans only use values to make every decision about everything in their lives. Whether they know they're doing it or not, we're hardwired to chase our values all day long. So you need all three. Demographics as a what? What are these people? Psychographics, what have they done so far? And ValueGraphics, how do I get them to pay attention to me and make a decision I would like them to make?
So in its very simplest terms, vision graphics as an entity, you have this big bucket full of information, of data that you have collected internationally from hundreds and thousands of people. How do you actually find out what an individual's values are?
See, there's the trick. We don't do this for individuals. We do this for groups. Lots of ways to find the values of an individual. Psychologists can give you an MMPI inventory, a Myers-Briggs test. There's all kinds of great tools you can use for one person. What never existed before was a way to understand an entire group of people and what values they have in common, so that you can talk to them using that as a guide. If you speak into people's values, they can't help but pay attention. It's like ringing a bell and they're like, wow, what's that all about? That's for me. So if you know what they have in common, now you kind of have, we like to say, the operating system for that group of people. You know what they're going to do next and how you need to frame up your story in a way that's going to attract their attention.
So when I work with clients in presentation skills, public speaking, or even in media training, I say to them, think about the audience. Where do you want to take the audience with the information you're presenting? And then let's work backwards from there to figure out how to get there. So you actually take a much deeper dive into my advice of knowing your audience by saying, oh no, you can't just know them. You have to know them, know them.
Yeah, you got to know them. That's a great, I'm going to use that line. I like that. You can't just know people. You got to know them. The demographic information that we all tend to use to try and understand an audience when we're putting together a presentation or deciding how we're going to give a speech or whatever it is we're trying to accomplish, it leads us down some pretty dangerous paths, because what it does is force us to think about people in stereotypical ways. If somebody that you're talking to, someone's filled you in and said, you know what, it's mostly women, they're mostly age 40 to 60, and they're, they're all college graduates. Well, then what are you going to do? You're going to leap to some stereotypical ideas about who those people are and how you can talk to them, right? What else are you going to do? You just rely on stereotypes. So here's the problem. 750,000 surveys that we've collected around the world now in 152 languages across 180 countries. We've built the first global record of what everybody on the planet cares about, what our values are. And we can divide this up demographically, and we can look at it and say, how often are women alike? How often are boomers alike? How often are people who earn $100,000 a year, people who have 2.3 children, any of those groups? And the answer is hardly at all. People within any of those demographic labels, if you average them out, they agree with each other on anything about 10.5% of the time. So back to the scenario you're painting, you're going to give a presentation, you're going to give a speech, and you know that you're talking to women of a certain age who are at a certain amount of money. that's going to get you about 10% accuracy if you resort to those stereotypes. That's not good. That means 90% of what you assume is wrong. Now, what's better is to say to yourself, what makes these people tick? What's the last thing they think about before they go to bed at night? What's the first thing on their mind when they wake up in the morning? What freaks them out? What gets them excited? That has nothing to do with their demographics. That stuff, those values that drive us, that stuff is agnostic to demographic labels. There will be people in an audience who are environmentalists, extremely concerned about what's going on with our planet. Knowing that about them is far more valuable than knowing whether they're male or female or rich or poor, young or old, black or white, all those other kinds of things that we know. So the trick is to get to the point where you're understanding what their drivers are. What are their values? What are they chasing all day long? And then pitch your speech, your presentation, your topic into those categories of concern. And that's the way you're going to turn them on.
Let me give you a for instance. So I am John F. Kennedy, excuse me, and I am wanting to launch the American space program. I want to land some American guys on the moon. What could ValueGraphics tell me in terms of how I present this concept to the public?
Yeah. So can you send information out to the people who are listening? Because I'd really love to share 3 questions they can use to ask anybody that they're trying to get in front of and understand. I'll give them these 3 magic questions that they can use to get to some level of values. But to go back to your question about John F. Kennedy and the space program, which is a brilliant question, by the way, I love this. What we would find by understanding the American population and saying, how do we pitch the space program so that everybody feels this is just the most amazing thing that's ever happened and that they're happy their tax dollars are going to support this thing. You'll find that some people are really excited about this because of, let's say, environmentalism. The reason they think this is an amazing idea is our environment's going to hell in a handbasket. We better figure out how to get to another planet pretty darn quick here. There might be other folks who are interested in this because of status. Our country got there first. Yay us. There might be other people who are interested in this because of family. Wow, I'm not sure where this is going, this world that we live in right now, but the fact that we're out exploring options for the long term makes me feel good. Maybe not about my kids, but my kids' kids or my kids' kids' kids, knowing that we're starting to think bigger thoughts. That helps me feel better about my life. So we're all going to have different reasons why a particular subject is interesting. And so these 3 questions. So there's 3 questions you can ask. You can do this all kinds of ways. I mean, if you get the opportunity to send these out as a little survey to the people you're going to speak to in advance, or even just talking to as many of them as you can and doing this in a kind of colloquial, conversational way. I'll counsel clients who are going to go down this road and use this kind of clunky, this is like the back of a napkin sketch version of ValueGraphics. Like when we work with a client, it's hyper precise and we do thousands and thousands and thousands of surveys and all this stuff. This is the way to do it, just kind of over the kitchen table.
Yep.
So the first question you want to ask is, why do you go to work? You're going to get all kinds of different answers. You're going to get people talking about all kinds of different things. And you got to listen for the similarities, because those similarities, they'll be clustered. You'll see themes emerge. Those themes are values rising to the surface. The people telling you why they go to work. The second question, and we've tested these so many times I can't even count anymore. These are really powerful, powerful questions. The second question is, why would you give away half of your lottery winnings? Not who would you give it to, but why would you give away half of your lottery winnings? Again, listen for the patterns in the noise. You'll start to see signals. Those signals are actually the values bubbling to the surface. The third question, this one's my favorite. You get to ask yourself from 10 years ago a question. What would you ask and why? I don't really care what the question is. What I care about is the why. Why that question? Why that piece of information? So you see the pattern here. It's the why. Why do you go to work? Why would you give away your money? Why would you talk to yourself in the past that way? Simon Sinek's been running around for decades now, making millions of dollars going, why? And here is the empirical data that you can use to answer that question. You work with ValueGraphics, and here, those 3 questions will lead you to the why of your target audience. And that's what you're trying to get to. Why do they live their lives the way they do? If you know that, now you know how to talk to them about anything: space programs, beer, ball caps, lawn fertilizer, asparagus recipes. It doesn't matter what you want to talk about. If you know why people are doing the things they do, you know how to frame it up so that it lands right inside those values that they're looking for.
Are Canadian values different from American values?
Oh, great question and a great story. So 2 of the most important values that show up all over the world are family and belonging. And in Canada and the US, they're both number 1 and number 2, but they are flipped. So in the US, the most important value to the entire population is belonging, followed by family. In Canada, it's the reverse: family first, then belonging. Now, think about all the stories we've heard recently about how my friends in the United States have had arguments with their family over political affiliations, and Aunt Sally and Uncle Bob are no longer invited to Christmas because they chose the wrong tribe. Belongingness is more important than family. Now in Canada, it's the inverse. Family is more important than belonging. So, all right, you voted this way, you belong to that group, you did this thing, but you're still family. You're coming to dinner.
Yeah, here's your burger.
Yeah, here's your
Pick
burger.
Pick up a burger, grab a beer, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, family and belonging are, and there's all kinds of other values that make Canadians and Americans slightly different from each other. But that's the one that's got, like, for me, the most immediate kind of, wow, of course. I mean, now that we see it in the data, you're like, that makes so much sense.
It does make so much sense. So are our values as human beings, are they changing over time? Are we different in terms of our values than the ancient Greeks when they were inventing democracy? I mean, we've got that in common. Have our values changed?
Yeah, our values change in a glacial way. Not even generations, but entire. So people from the 50s, very different than people from today. So it's like 2 or 3 generations of life have gone through before we start to see the evolution of values over time. What's interesting is our values have always been with us. We've always reacted to the world based on our values. Again, we're hardwired like this. It's neurology. Our prefrontal cortex only makes sense of the world by filtering it through our values. So we can't help it. Being human is being values driven. That's just what it is. We can't argue about that. It's just a fact. But what's changed, which is kind of a fascinating and big subject to think about, is the world around us is largely of our own devising. We've created institutions to serve us, like education, religion, politics, democracy, banking, finance. All of these institutions were built at a time in the past to meet our needs and match our values. Now, they've only changed marginally, while our values have changed significantly between 200 years ago, when democracy was maybe, no, I guess democracy is even older than that. So these institutions are very, very old. Our values have very slowly, but gradually and incrementally changed. So here's humans. Our values are now here. We created the world around us with values that are back here. And these things have only been changing a little bit. This is why there's so much divisiveness in the world right now. What we need to do is figure out how to get these institutions to catch up to who we are today. Human beings have become something entirely new. We've become we'd be unrecognizable to ourselves from 1,000 years ago. But the institutions we've created to serve us, they haven't changed much at all. That gap, if you go take this down to a very personal level, when you go and see a psychologist, what's going on there? A counselor's lying you down on the couch and saying, what's going on in your life? How come you're here? How are you out of alignment with your values? Let's evaluate what's going on in your life and see if we can't figure out a way to get your life to meet your values. That makes a happy person. When you're in alignment with your values, your reality and your values are in alignment, you're happy. Globally, as a species, our reality and our values are out of alignment right now. And that's why That's why. I mean, you fill in the blank. That's why X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F. If I can just carry on with that rant for 2 seconds, because this is the stuff that I get really emotional about. Our data can help organizations pinpoint exactly what they need to do and say to get people to buy product A or product B. It's a breakthrough in the way we can think about audiences. And that's all fun. It makes people money and that's all good. But the real reason we're doing this and we're so passionate about it is because the longer we all continue to look at each other and evaluate each other based on outward characteristics like male, female, young, old, rich, poor, black, white, the longer we resort to those stereotypes that we talked about at the beginning of our chat today. And those stereotypes are fuel for ageism and sexism and racism and homophobia, and you know the rest of the list. So if we can provide an alternative way of looking at people and just thinking about the people that we encounter, that we work with, we work for, that we speak to, that we present to, if we can look at the world a little differently, we can change the world. We can narrow that gap. We can start to turn the volume down on some of those problems that we're grappling with, and quite unsuccessfully, I will say, day after day after day, because we still use demographic lenses to look at each other. We just got to stop that.
So that was a fabulous final last word. I was going to ask you about the bigger mission and you beat me to it. So David, thank you so much. I think this is absolutely fascinating and we could go on forever and ever, and perhaps we will on another occasion. But thank you so much for doing this with me today. It has been a delight.
I'm glad to have been here. Thanks so much.